Well, should we go ahead and get started, Latoya? Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this bright and early Saturday morning. We're really glad you're here. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a member of the consultant team working with the City of Charlottesville Department of Neighborhood Development Services on this effort called Cville Plans Together. Also with me today is Latoya Thomas and Dina Roadside from the consultant team. Whether you've already participated in several events or this is your first one, again, it's really good to see you. We're glad you're here. Today we're going to share some information about the priorities we heard in May and June of this year, as well as otherwise, and our draft thoughts on how we can begin to adjust the comprehensive plan to reflect those community priorities. I'll say this probably several times today, but please keep in mind that this is really only the first step in updating the comprehensive plan. We'll talk more about next steps today. One note before we really get started, feel free to submit questions at any time. We're going to stop periodically to take some poll questions, but we'll also take some discussion questions at those points as well. We might need to limit discussion between topics, but we will at the end address any remaining questions. So again, just submit them at any point. First, I think many of you may be familiar with Cville Plans Together, but we just want to remind everyone kind of what we're thinking about. So Cville Plans Together is the name of a process, and there's a few specific outcomes related to this process. So first right now, we are working to revise the city's comprehensive plan. And as part of that update to the comprehensive plan, we've drafted an affordable housing plan, which will feed into the comprehensive plan goals and strategies. Once the revised comprehensive plan, including the affordable housing plan, once that's completely updated, we will rewrite the zoning ordinance to ensure that it reflects all these goals and strategies that will be in the updated plan. If you want to find out more background information about where we're coming from with Cville Plans Together, please visit the website cvilleplans-together.com, or we can talk about your questions today. Right now, we are in the second phase of community input. We're sharing some draft materials for community review through December 2nd. The materials we're sharing, as you may know, include the draft initial comprehensive plan updates, which are the focus of our discussion today. And the items we're sharing for review in terms of the comprehensive plan are these high-level community input-driven priority statements, because we need to discuss these and talk about them and revise them further before we can move forward to the goals and strategies that fall under these vision statements. So those goals and strategies, those will be a next step in the process. As I mentioned, we've also got a draft affordable housing plan out right now for community review. There are separate webinars and events scheduled for that element. If you have questions about the draft affordable housing plan, you can feel free to pose them today, but I just wanted to let you know our housing-focused team members are not on the call today. So we can try to answer your question, but we may need to follow up afterward to respond to your question further. There are some other events, open office hours and other webinars that I'll talk about in a second where you can also come and ask those questions. We have a web page that has all of the available draft materials as well as all of the events that are going on for the next several weeks. And we're calling this the virtual meeting page. You can see the link here in pink on the screen. There are sort of three sections to this virtual meeting page. There's an engagement summary that goes over what we heard in May and June. There's an affordable housing plan page with the draft affordable housing plan document, and then the comprehensive plan page. And so you can access that by clicking on the buttons, whether you're on desktop or mobile, it should work just fine either way. You can translate the site. If you go to translate, that's one of the key benefits of laying things out as we did. All of the text on the website can be translated. If you go to this website and you scroll to the bottom, that's where you can find all the information about the upcoming events that we've got going on, as you may know, since you're here with us today. That being said, we would like to start going through what we heard a bit earlier this year. And so for that, I will pass it off to Latoya.
Thanks, Jenny. So some of you may have participated in our earlier engagement efforts, but if you didn't, we'll just do a quick recap so you know what we started in the process earlier this year that's really brought us to where we are right now. So in May and June of this year, we kicked off our first stage of public engagement, which was really focused around gathering input about the community's goals and priorities for the future. We were particularly concerned about issues of equity and housing affordability, among the many other issues that are part of this process for consideration. Next slide. So we used a couple of different tools to actually get input from the community. Some of you may have participated in some of these tools. You'll see them listed here, but we ran a very large community-wide survey. We did several webinars and a small group facilitate discussions virtually. So this slide just gives you a recap of some of the ways that we actually reached out to folks. I'll also reiterate that most of these tools will also be continue to be used in some form or fashion over the next several months as we continue to move through the process. In order to inform people about how they can engage in this process, we used a variety of different tools to get information out and to share content. And again, we're using most of these tools going forward over the next several months as well. Tools like our website, flyers, social media, as well as the email newsletters that some of you might be receiving, and our toll-free numbers. So again, we'll continue to use these tools as we move forward. So I mentioned earlier that we did a community-wide survey earlier in the year. This slide just gives you some highlights around what we heard during that survey. You can actually view the full survey summary on the website if you really want to dig down into the details. But we did want to highlight just a few items. Number one, 66% of the survey respondents were from city residents, and then 19% from Albemarle County. That was important for us to highlight because we wanted to make sure that the county participated in this process as well because of the nature of regionalism between Charlottesville and Albemarle, as well as the surrounding counties. We also asked questions in the survey specific to race and ethnicity, as well as if you were a renter or homeowner or did not have housing. Those demographics help to inform some of our strategies going forward in this process. One thing we also want to highlight is that the breakdown of the demographics that we received in the survey does not necessarily reflect the city's actual composition. But what the survey responses tell us based on certain demographic groups that responded, it shows us patterns related to how people of different groups may have responded to the survey. Next slide. There were several key themes that came out of the survey that are related to goals and priorities for the future, and that we are making a central focus to the next steps in this process as we move forward. Just to highlight those, housing affordability, which has been a key theme throughout this entire process that we've heard from multiple stakeholders across the city and the county. Racial equity, including concerns around displacement and gentrification. Strengthening existing partnerships and coordination, and that's within city, the county, as well as UVA, and then with area organizations and nonprofits. And then concern around or desire to have less disconnect between topics covered in the comprehensive plan. So making sure that the comprehensive plan as a guiding document is actually doing its job, and that everything that's in there is actually linked and interrelated so that we can see the trajectory of how the work that can result from the comprehensive plan can be linked to the various issues that are covered, like housing and equity and economic development and transportation. The other thing I'll mention, sorry, go back one second, Jenny, thanks. The other thing I'll mention is that we use the demographic data that we obtained to see where input varied by group. And so we were able to see different patterns of support for home ownership that varied across racial demographic lines. Again, as I mentioned, you can see the survey results in more detail on the website. So in terms of just how we're going to use and continue to use this input, we've identified the key themes that I summarized previously. And those themes are going to be utilized in the draft initial comp plan revisions and the draft affordable housing plan. And then we'll continue to reinforce the input received to date, along with any additional input that we receive from you as we assess potential new or revised goals and strategies. So the input that we receive from all of you throughout this process is really critical to ensuring that the plans and strategies that we're developing as a team are really guiding what the next steps are the city needs to take based on what the community feels is most important.
Great. Thanks, LaToya. I just want to reiterate, we went through sort of these results from the survey, which was this huge effort. We had over 1,000 responses, which was great. But a lot of those themes that we pulled out in the priorities, they really came out in a lot of the small group discussions we had, a lot of other stakeholder discussions. So it's really reflective of everything we heard in May and June. One thing we'd like to do before we move on is to get a sense of how you all may have been involved in some of these activities, whether you participated in the survey, webinars, etc., in May and June. So I think we're going to pull up a poll here shortly. Here we go. If you want to go ahead and select all of them that apply, anything you might have participated in that first round of community engagement. Great. This is a short one, I suppose, a straightforward answer, maybe the most of the 3 polls we'll be asking you today. Let's see, yeah. I guess we can give it a few seconds. And see
yep, give it 5 more seconds and we'll shut it down.
Cool.
All right.
Great, so thank you. So it looks like several of you did the survey and came to the webinars. No one indicated that they used the phone line, and that's fine. We found that we didn't really get comments via the phone line during the first round of engagement, but we had a lot of calls, people calling presumably to listen to the overview message for the project. So that was great. That was one of the outcomes we wanted from that. So thank you for that information. As I said, we'll have a couple more polls as we go through today. So let's talk a bit about the comprehensive plan. As I think many of you likely know, the comprehensive plan, or comp plan as we might sometimes call it, this is a document that really describes and sort of illustrates in words and graphics community goals and priorities related to the future. It really guides decision-making, when it comes to the built environment and sort of the form of the city. But in order for the guidelines in the comprehensive plan to be really legally binding, they generally need to be reflected in the city's ordinance. And so an update to the zoning code is a part of our Cville Plans Together process. It's the next step, as I mentioned, after completion of the comprehensive plan. So the current comprehensive plan that's in place now is from 2013, and the Planning Commission has to review the comprehensive plan every 5 years. They don't have to make changes, but they have to review it. And so they started that in 2017 and 2018. And so we're not starting from scratch on this update, but we're continuing from where they left off with those initial updates to really make sure that we're looking at housing affordability and we're looking at equity, as well as other emerging areas of community interest. And if you want to go back and look and see, what those draft chapters said from the 2018 process, we've got all of that on our website. You go to documents and materials, and then related plans, studies, and other documents. So that was a very fast overview of what the comprehensive plan is. We're happy to answer questions about that, but we really wanted to get into what are we looking at revising in the comprehensive plan. So the draft updates that we're proposing at this stage are focused on the statements that describe the outcome the community is working toward. There are these draft guiding principles and vision statements, which we'll go through more shortly. And this, again, is really the first step in this larger process of updating the comprehensive plan. The guiding principles and vision statements really, again, define these what I'll call big picture priorities. They'll be the basis for other revisions that will help us work toward those outcomes. So to help illustrate this, we pulled in this graphic. So in general, this graphic is meant to show that we are defining a future outcome that we want first, and then guidelines for getting there. And then we will define what specific actions we take to get to that outcome. So to dive into each of those two different big picture areas, let's first look at the guiding principles. So the guiding principles define priorities that apply to the entire comprehensive plan document. They are really an evolution of the community values that were defined in the 2013 plan. And for 2013, those values were really a piece of the city council strategic plan vision at that time. And so we're envisioning instead adjusting in the comprehensive plan document, adjusting that idea to be guiding principles specific to the comprehensive plan that can apply throughout. And we still want them to be complementary to the city council strategic plan and their priorities, but we want to make sure they were specific to the comprehensive plan document. So another way to think about the guiding principles is there are things that we're keeping in mind, and using as a guide as we work toward building this bridge toward the outcomes we've identified. And again, those outcomes are identified in the vision statements. And so the vision statements, unlike the guiding principles, apply specifically to a certain topic specific chapter. And I'll probably use that phrase topic specific chapters a few times. That refers to the chapters of the plan that you see in this bubble here. Things like transportation, land use, housing. Those are the types of sort of overall topics that we're talking about. And so each vision statement outlines a future vision or outcome that forms the basis for short and long-term actions within each of these chapters. So just to show this graphic again, so we're bringing a full picture, these vision statements are the outcome we're working toward. They're, what we're taking, and I don't want to indicate that we think we're done with these. We're putting out draft vision statements, draft guiding principles based on what we heard in May and June, but we want more input on these so we can refine them and make sure we've got the right vision before we move to the next step. So that was an overview of what the vision statements and guiding principles are. But we do want to walk through a bit of the content of each of them. And we're not going to go through line by line, looking through the wording that's specifically in each of them. We do welcome you to do that. Certainly, if you want to go walk through things, we're glad to have your thoughts on specific wording. But I just want to walk through sort of the topics covered in each of these. So to help, let's look at the structure of the chapters. So this is the general structure for each chapter, each of these topic-specific chapters in the plan. We also want to show what it looks like in the actual document. So in this case, this is an example from the 2013 land use chapter. So in this chapter, you see in the orange box, the vision statement. Again, this describes the overall vision for the future of this topic, in this case, land use. Within the chapter, there's then a goal or several goals, which mention specific outcomes within that vision statement. And then beneath each goal, there's a set of strategies listed for that goal. So right now we are working on the orange vision statement component. This is the list of chapters that we've updated as part of this draft. And so you can see here some of these names are different than you may have seen in the 2013 chapter, and I'll point out some of those changes as we go through them. To start with, let's look at the community engagement and collaboration chapter. This is actually a new chapter for the comprehensive plan. There's not, in the 2013 plan, there is no community engagement chapter, but it's a really important thing to put in there. And so we're excited that the city wanted to add that. So let's look at what we've got in there so far for the vision statement. So I'm going to read through this. Again, this is an abbreviated version of the vision statement, but in general, recognizing the need for improvements from previous practices, this vision statement envisions that the city will directly seek input, especially from those who are not often heard from and those who may be most impacted by planning for other projects. The city will also facilitate and effectively communicate about transparent, accessible, and respectful input opportunities. The city will also widely and proactively share information in several ways, and will work to ensure that residents really understand all planning processes and how the income could potentially impact them. Recognizing that there are so many organizations and other community-driven groups working in the city. We've also identified that the city should seek out information sharing partnerships with all of those local organizations. They do that a lot now, but that's something that needs to continue moving forward. And then the last piece of this vision statement really thinks about every way that the community is involved in the sort of governance structure of the city. And we've identified that all city appointed boards, commissions, and committees should be representative of and sensitive to Charlottesville's diversity and range of perspectives. So again, this is a general sort of overview of what is in this vision statement. And we'd love to hear from you, today or otherwise, if you think anything's missing in this, or if you like what we put out. The next topic here is something we're calling land use, urban form, and historic preservation. And so for those of you who are familiar with the comprehensive plan, you may notice this is a combination of two of the current chapters in the plan. So we're proposing combining the land use chapter with a different chapter, which was currently called historic preservation and urban design. Land use, historic preservation, and urban design are all really connected, especially in Charlottesville. And we thought that combining them into one chapter could make it easier to identify goals that look at the interactions between those areas. So here are some of the topics we're thinking of covering in this plan. The guiding principles cover things like through all plans, policies, and regulations, the city should strive to eliminate racial and economic inequities, improve housing, enhance livability, improve environmental quality, support efficient transportation, promote infill development, and increase commercial vitality. We've also identified that the city should be welcoming, human-scaled, sustainable, well-utilized, equitable, and beautiful. All those spaces in the city should have those characteristics. The guiding principle also, the vision statement also identifies that urban design and historic preservation efforts should both have ways that they contribute to the character and quality of neighborhoods and the community. We don't think they need to butt heads. We think looking at new sort of urban design elements can really work well with historic preservation efforts. We also think that land use and urban form should celebrate the full diversity of people and the uniqueness of the many places within Charlottesville. And this also identifies that communities should look for ways to broaden the range of recognized histories and narratives that are identified in the city. There's a deep history in a lot of neighborhoods in the city that some may not know about, and it could be better reflected in the design and land use planning efforts. So next up is housing. And so the vision statement for the housing chapter is, as you may guess, influenced by the draft affordable housing plan vision statement that is out now. But the housing chapter does not only cover sort of affordable housing, but it goes beyond that. There's other additional aspects of housing and the way we live. So we've identified here that recognizing the importance of housing for all residents is really important, and that the city should be implementing strategies to achieve a housing market that is affordable, healthy, high quality, and above all, equitable. The city needs to identify and address injustice in the provision of housing options for all, and also needs to celebrate and enhance this sort of variety of available housing types and sizes that are available now or should be. And then, sort of enhance both rental and homeownership opportunities. We don't want to focus on one or the other. The city should also make clear steps toward addressing affordability, homelessness, and displacement of people from their neighborhoods to really create these really culturally and demographically diverse and thriving neighborhoods. Let's see, I see one question that came up that I want to address. So Crystal asked, what does human scale mean and what things are not human scale? And that's a great question that I'll answer shortly, but I want to note, we've tried to make these statements be clear and understandable for anyone who picks them up, but we've already identified ways that we need to improve those. And so this is one that I'm so glad you pointed out. I do not think human scaled is maybe as intuitive as we want it to be, but to address your question, so what does human scale mean? We want people to feel comfortable when they're walking around in the city, in their neighborhood. There's a current sort of scale of things, a scale of the buildings, a scale of the development that's happening. And human scale indicates that things should be sort of comfortable to a person walking around. You know, sometimes if a building is, for example, much larger than the other buildings in the neighborhood or the area, that might be sort of and makes someone feel like it's sort of looming over them, and so that would not be an ideal human scale. But you know, I think I'm going to take your comment and we'll work on clarifying that in the document. And Dina, if you have other thoughts you would want to share on that, you know, feel free.
I think that description is correct. I think that what we have heard is many of Charlottesville's, and we know is that many of Charlottesville's neighborhoods already have taken into account scale and a variety of scale, and it's been uppermost on many people's minds. And so what we're suggesting here is to maintain the attention that's paid to thinking about scale of neighborhood while still addressing all of these other goals along the way. And so we look forward to hearing your input on this. We know it's critical to all of the residents in Charlottesville, and we want to make sure that we get this right.
Yeah, so thank you again for that question. That's I'm glad you pointed that out. I'd also like to respond. There's a question about whether neighborhoods are able to vote on proposed zoning changes for their region. You know, giving the example of the Virginia landmark designation process. And so we, you know, as you know, as we've mentioned, we're not at the zoning phase yet, but we are, sorry, I'm looking at things that are popping up. So when we get to the zoning phase, I think I do not believe there is a plan to have an official vote on zoning changes, but they will go through the public hearing process with the council, and that would be the point at which we'd be seeking input. We will also be having community discussions similar to the ones we've been having as we move forward. So we'll be working to assess how the community feels about them in that way too. Let's see here. I'm going to say, maybe let's go through the rest of these, and then let's talk some more about these questions once we get through the vision statements, because there might be some areas of overlap here. But thank you for these questions. We're going to keep them up. So next up, I wanted to go through the environment, health, and energy chapter. And so as you may know, this is a proposed chapter title change from the current title from the 2018 drafts of Urban Environmental Sustainability. And our goal here with the title change was to really clarify the sort of breadth of topics that are covered in this chapter. So to go through that a bit, this vision statement envisions that Charlottesville will have healthy air, water, and land, as well as ample and accessible open spaces, and a preserved and enhanced tree canopy. The city will also focus on food security and access to healthy food for all residents, and will make steady progress toward meeting the goal of citywide carbon neutrality by 2050. The city will also utilize green infrastructure and encourage healthy and low carbon lifestyles by supporting walking, bicycling, and transit use, as well as access to the outdoors. The city will also mitigate and prepare for the potential impacts of climate change by increasing reliable access to and use of clean energy sources, as well as updating building standards and improving environmental quality. So this incorporates some existing commitments that have been made for climate, as well as some other topics that have been discussed a lot in the city, including food access. Here we have the transportation vision summary. So that envisions that the city will enhance the reliability, safety, efficiency, and equitability of the transportation system. The city will serve vehicles with existing facilities while expanding options and connectivity for other travel modes where possible. The city will also look at affordable and expanded transit coverage, particularly in lower wealth areas and areas that lack current access. This envisions a multimodal transportation network that is well integrated with land use to support access to jobs and other destinations while reducing automobile reliance. And along with that, it envisions that provision of parking will be coordinated with the urban form goals, But if they're looking at reductions of parking, for example, that would also be looking at mitigating potential impacts in neighborhoods, respecting the needs of residents, businesses, employees, visitors, and others when it comes to parking. Next up, we have economic prosperity and opportunity. This chapter was previously called Economic Sustainability, and this proposed chapter title change aims to really center this chapter on supporting economic development that makes the city stronger and creates opportunities for all residents. So this envisions that Charlottesville will have a vibrant and resilient economy with a diversified and broadened economic base. Envisions that the city will be supportive of businesses, including small and minority-owned businesses, and that the city will continue to participate in regional economic initiatives. The city will connect the community with meaningful opportunities for wealth creation. That was a really important thing that we've been hearing a lot. As part of that, the building of career ladders of opportunity and economic mobility will be bolstered by ensuring that local economic growth is paired with the development of employment, training, and other opportunities for residents. So as the economy grows locally, residents should be brought along with that growth. When it comes to community facilities, the chapter was previously called just community facilities, but we proposed the addition of services to the chapter title to clarify that access to services related to or within facilities is an important goal for the future. This includes looking at things like access to outstanding schools, recreational facilities and trails, civic facilities and public buildings, public services, and infrastructure, noting that the city should support access to all of these things. The city should support the health and welfare of residents and the quality of the environment in both the city and region. And the city should set a national standard for for emergency response and community-oriented public safety, with clear strategies aimed at building trust and relationships with all neighborhoods. So those were again, an overview of these vision statements that we put out for each of the chapters, topic-specific chapters of the comprehensive plan. Let's see, I think there are still some questions here, so I'd like to respond to those. So this question from John, please explain how you balance human scale with increased density and increased height in downtown areas. He knows it definitely needs more discussion. It can be read as minimizing building height and density. Yes, agreed. There needs to be a balance there. And part of it is looking at not focusing on one neighborhood to really increase height in a lot of ways. For example, it's thinking about the impacts of each community where the scale might be changing, by a lot. We can't just say, let's put a lot of density into one neighborhood. We need to look at how, one thing we heard was that people want to see more housing throughout the city. And so ways of sort of balancing density in that way, for example. Dina, did you have other thoughts?
I think that balancing human scale doesn't necessarily need to mean increased height. And I think that each area of the city needs to be considered separately, as I think this question gets at to some extent. And I think that a number of the questions that you see here being addressed, particularly, for instance, Kathy Galvin's questions, I think are right on target about this, in the sense that greater density doesn't always need to be thought of as high-rise options or solutions. That the context is very much something that one needs to keep in mind. The location within an area, whether it's on a major transit way, on a street that's a larger street, or in the heart of a single-family neighborhood, one needs to think about that context. And then as our coding person, Code Studio, Lee Einsweiler, has said, the option of looking at the different types of density. There is just not one definition of higher density or density, that there's some options that are softer densities as well, that and the reason for that is that they are compatible then with their surroundings, and yet still meet some of the density requirements that one will need to have in order to provide more options for housing, which ultimately will lead to more affordability of housing in Charlottesville. So I think that it is not a simple density or no density issue. It's an issue of how can density be used to both respect and preserve neighborhoods as well as provide for the options of affordable housing.
So agree, to John's point, agree that human scale is not maybe the right term. It can be interpreted different ways. So we'll work to clarify that there. Let's see. Catherine, I'm not sure I understand the comment about where human scale words are needed. So if you want to submit a question to clarify, that might be useful. Let's see. Peter had a question. When talking about climate, we need to be able to respond to drastically changing conditions, including emergencies, and the comp plan needs to set us up for that. So he wanted us to be explicit about that. You know, the modeling best practices in building design will not be sufficient. So part of what we're doing in the comprehensive plan is including the goals that have been addressed already for climate. But yeah, no, you're right. We need to respond to how that plays out throughout the plan. Built form, transportation, environment chapter, I think they all have a piece to play when it comes to climate. As I'm sure you know, there's a parallel, well, not parallel, but there's a process happening in the city to do the climate action plan as well. And so part of that's working with that team to see what might be coming out of that process while we're currently in the comprehensive plan phase, and how we can dovetail with that to make sure that they are working together and speaking to each other as documents. Let's see. So there's Catherine had a question about where human scale comes up. Just to point it out, we have, oops. So it is on the land use slide here. So there is that. There was also wanting us to clarify that only council votes on zoning changes. And so just to clarify my response earlier, you know, there's not citizen votes typically on zoning changes of the city. So the way to influence those changes is by participating in meetings to council, submitting comments in that way, you know, submitting comments to planning commission and whatnot. So I appreciate that, wanting us to emphasize that. Let's see here. There was a comment about, isn't the best place to increase density the low density zones, because that's the place that has the most room to grow. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And, you know, for example, in the draft affordable housing plan, you know, that is by design a little further ahead in this process. You know, that plan is putting out some specific recommendations, and though they don't point out specific neighborhoods for types of zoning changes, they are proposing both what they're calling soft density and then multifamily density. And so it's looking at different ways to increase density but in different neighborhoods. You know, Charlottesville, as you all know, does not have a lot of space to put new housing. So by adding additional density into neighborhoods in different scales, that's how we're going to get more density within the city itself. So we are looking at ways to increase density, even in small ways in some lower density zones. That is something that's being considered as part of this process.
I think that's right. I think the thing to emphasize is that density does not mean just high density. Density means a scale of densities. And when we talk about human scale, or we talk about relevance to existing neighborhoods, there's a range of density that needs to be considered. And so it's not just an either or situation. It is a situation of a range of those densities.
Let's see. I'm trying to look at these questions that were coming in. And we'll answer a couple more of these, and then I think we'll move on to the next section, and we can talk more about the remaining questions in the end. Kathy noted that the current draft is silent on the topic of reclaiming, repairing, and reimagining areas in the city and county that are now dominated by auto-centric and aging industrial sites. You know, and looking at ways to do that via neighborhood-focused and people-driven small area plans. You know, noting that a lot of those sites are results of urban renewal from 60 years ago that destroyed Black neighborhoods and the walkable sort of networks that existed. So suggesting that it could be a statement of principle or a goal or a strategy. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to think about. The sort of reclaiming, I think repairing, reimagining, you're right, those are not words we've sort of included here. And I think that is worth a larger discussion. You know, it's, especially in Charlottesville, there are communities that are still in these places, even though the places sort of look different, the people sometimes are still the same. And I think sometimes when you talk about, you know, reimagining, for example, that can be kind of a scary word. But I think thinking of things like reclaiming, repairing, I think that's an interesting idea. So I'd like for us to consider that as well. So thank you for that.
I agree. I think it's a good suggestion.
Let's see. I'm going to suggest let's go through the guiding principles, because I think some of these comments that we made might also address some of those. So does that sound okay? Dina, LaToya, do you agree, or do you think is there any? Okay. All right. So hold well, you don't have to hold other questions. You can send them in, but we'll address them in a bit. But we do have one poll we'd like to pull up, actually based on these vision statements that we've been discussing. We are wanting to know, you know, which of these sort of different topics, these different chapters, are you most sort of passionate or concerned about? You know, which are maybe your main focus of attention at this point, recognizing that they are all important to this process. Let's see, how many can they choose for this one, LaToya? 2. So this is a choose 2 situation.
And close in 5 seconds.
All right, thanks guys. So land use, urban form, historic preservation toward the top, transportation toward the top, but, you know, some across the board there, except for community engagement and collaboration, which is interesting. But, you know, as I said, these are all important. I think we would all recognize that. And so choosing 2 is certainly difficult. So thank you for those thoughts here. It's interesting to see the results of the poll. All right. So next, let's look back at the guiding principles. So again, these are things to keep in mind as we're sort of working toward those topic-specific chapter outcomes that we just talked about and that we'll be refining further. So we are proposing 5 guiding principles. They're not listed in any particular order here, but I'll go through them briefly. And there are, again, longer statements for each of these on the website. So equity and opportunity is one of our guiding principles. And in general, that's saying that all people should be able to thrive in Charlottesville. The second statement is related to local and regional collaboration, and that notes that from the neighborhood to the region, open conversations and partnerships will make the city stronger. And that includes things like partnerships with Albemarle County, as well as, you know, people like UVA, large institutions as well. Environmental stewardship and sustainability. The Charlottesville community should demonstrate environmental and climate leadership. And that looks on the outset like I might be really focused on just environment, but it's looking at the ways that it's connected to land use, to transportation, all those other chapters as we've discussed a bit. Connections and access. The city should consider land use and transportation in complementary ways, creating better and safer mobility options for all. And then community, culture, and unity. Charlottesville's rich and diverse culture should be celebrated, and the entire community should create an environment in which all of the city's residents feel welcomed, valued, and respected. So again, these are sort of the initial statements with each of these, but there are a slightly longer explanation for each of these or some descriptive text, and we welcome your input on any of that. You can find that on the website. So as we've talked about, all of those guiding principles can apply across the entire comprehensive plan, or at least to several of the different areas. So if you look at any of these guiding principles, you can likely pick out ways that they connect to these different chapters of the plan. So these are the connections that we really look forward to explicitly outlining as we move forward. As you saw when Latoya went through what we heard from our May and June engagement, there was a real strong focus on showing how different solutions can impact all of these different areas that we're working toward. We don't want to have these, so to speak, like silos that we're working within. We want to show those connections. So again, that was a quick overview of these statements. And we're happy to talk about them further, but we would like to pull up a poll for these to get a sense of how you feel about these. So I'll let Latoya pull that one up for us. So which two of these do you think have the most need to be addressed throughout the plan? Especially when you look at your priorities, which are those that you think might be most important to guiding these outcomes we're working toward? And again, just as with the topics from the vision statements, I think we can all recognize that these are all important guiding principles. So again, I would understand it might be difficult to choose two.
And we'll close in 5 seconds.
All right, thanks. So again, we've got some across the board, but it looks like environmental stewardship and sustainability is important, along with connections and access. Those are the top two. So thank you for that, taking those polls with us. So on to some next steps, and then we'll get into the remaining questions. So this is our current schedule, which we updated in mid-October. As we've been saying, this is an ambitious schedule. It'll depend on how this phase of community review of materials goes. We want to make sure we have enough time to incorporate input. But we are in this stage of community review through December 2nd. And we are meeting with the Planning Commission in early December, on December 8th, to talk about some next steps, including whether we might need some adjustments to the schedule. But for now, this is our plan. One thing to note is that we are planning on a potential meeting to seek council endorsement of the draft affordable housing plan in January. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to confirm a direction for that plan, because it really influences things like the future land use map in the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan, as well as other strategies that will be coming out. So we want to make sure there's a direction there before we fully move forward. In general, this schedule, which you can find on our website on our front page, it assumes that we'll be coming out with the next public engagement period in early February, and that would include not only revisions to the vision statements and guiding principles based on what we hear during this next month, but also would include a draft land use map and revisions to the goals and strategies to respond to the vision statements. So we can look forward to that, to move to that next phase. So obviously we'll be talking with you a bit more today, but we wanted to make sure you knew about all the opportunities to tell us what you think. So again, you can find all materials on the page linked here. We'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar in case you want to pull that back up. On the website, you can walk through materials, and you can print the full housing plan or a shorter summary of the plan, and there's also a printable 3-page version of the comprehensive plan materials available. We know we're all spending a lot of time looking at screens, so you might want to print it off to review offline. But that being said, we'd love to have you participate in some of these other virtual activities. Again, thank you for being here today. If you have specific questions, we'll do our best to answer them when we're done here today, but we do have virtual office hours where you can drop in, and both the housing team and the comprehensive plan group are available to take your comments and respond to questions. We've also got the survey open through December 2nd, as well as that phone line. So those are the main activities. We've been working to distribute information about these through flyers. We're excited to say we're working with some peer engagers in Charlottesville who are community citizens that are helping us spread the word on the ground. And we're also looking at ways to have some maybe pop-up opportunities through the city, sort of a COVID-safe way.
Jenny, can you just go back to that for a minute? If you have not had a chance yet to go to attend the Affordable Housing Plan webinar, I would strongly suggest that you do that. I see that a number of the questions and concerns brought up today at this session, I think could be answered through the affordable housing presentation as well. And so I think both would be important to both this one on the comp plan and the affordable housing would be really critical to attend if you can possibly do it.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. That's a good point. We also have scheduled a steering committee meeting for November 23rd at 4 o'clock, and you're welcome to join for that. There's a link to register on our website. So that being said, before we move into answering the rest of the questions, I'd encourage you to please help us share this with folks. If you have people who might be interested or maybe don't know about the process, please let them know what's going on. That'd be great. Let's see. So let's dive into some of these questions. And if you have additional questions, feel free to pull them up. We'll work through some of these, and then I'll note if you'd like to ask a question verbally, we do offer the option if you want to select raise your hand. We can bring you off of mute to do that. So let's see. I'd like to respond to the question of whether there will be an implementation chapter with performance measures, and whether there will be a map that identifies areas that need more fine-grained planning, like small area plans. So to answer, there's a couple of questions within this question. So yes, there will be an implementation chapter with performance measures that will hopefully have a framework for that at that next stage in February. In terms of identifying areas that need more planning, small area plans, for example, or urban development areas, UDAs, we are thinking about what the future land use map looks like, and I think it could potentially identify those type of areas for additional planning needed. I think that's likely that we won't be able to get into, in the comprehensive plan level, the level of detail that might be needed for a certain neighborhood. So I would not rule out that there would be some areas identified for future planning efforts. Regarding the question of what will happen to the 4 small area plans already completed, again, that's a good question. We've reviewed those plans, and they will be used as we are updating the future land use map. We reviewed them early in this process, as well. And, you know, I think recognizing that there are a lot of people who are involved with those planning processes, having a way to make sure that they are involved in this comprehensive plan update will also be important. So I believe the plan is to do some direct outreach to those stakeholder groups as we move forward. And so I assume you're talking about the 4 smaller plans, things like the Cherry Avenue plan, I think was the most recent example of that. Let's see here. There was a question about whether there's a glossary page that defines all the terms, you know, noting that there's some confusion around terms that are unclear. They're in the comprehensive plan document, the final version, there will be a glossary. But to your point, I think having a glossary at this point would not be a bad idea. You know, it's certainly not our intent to confuse anyone. We want to make sure that these are documents that people can use, that they can pick up and don't need to sort of work out their own definition for something. We want to make that clear. So that'll be something we're working on as we move forward there. Let's see, a note about related to climate change. You know, there was a suggestion to, you know, we talked about that in the in both the guiding principles and the vision statements, you know, noting that there is a current commitment for 2050 goal. There's a comment that we should focus on a goal for 2030, not 2050. So, you know, we'll look with that group that was working on the climate action and see what might be the best way we can incorporate that. But right now we've got that sort of final end goal in there. Let's see here. Okay. So there's a question about how this proposal, you know, clearly and explicitly can address the patterns of segregation that were reinforced through Jim Crow housing patterns. You know, employing concentrations of density or incomes. And so I would suggest, you know, that's been sort of started to be addressed through the draft affordable housing plan. You know, there's such a wealth of knowledge in Charlottesville. One of the first things that when we came in was, you know, started our project last year, people were saying there's a mapping project going on that you need to be aware of in Charlottesville. And so, you know, mapping out those, for example, where there's these covenants that are written into properties right now that have this historic language in, you know, so this has been a part of our conversation from the very beginning. And so in the draft affordable housing plan, they are starting to look at strategies for how we can address that segregation, that whether or not it's explicitly still, you know, written in policies, it might come out in the sort of historic nature of land use planning. So it is something we're thinking about, and I would encourage you to look at the draft affordable housing plan. And then as we move forward, we'll look to incorporate some of that into the land use map. Let's see here. Let's see, there's a question question from Peter about in the community engagement section, whether there's anything like programs for educating for regular community members about how cities are made and how to be more involved. Things like planning college, you know, there's programs that other cities put on to make sure that people know sort of how the different steps that happen in terms of planning. And we, you know, we're not at the stage yet of having specific goals and actions, but I think something like, you know, quote unquote planning college or planning 101 as some call it. I think something like that would be a really great item to consider as an action in Charlottesville. There's such a wealth of knowledge with all the different groups that exist in the city, different nonprofits and whatnot. A lot of people are doing a lot of great work, but we know that there are a lot of, you know, people both doing that work and those who are sort of general community members who might not be aware of how processes, you know, happen and when they can really weigh in on them and what they mean. And so I think that's a good suggestion to consider as we move forward there.
And Jenny, sorry, just a quick additional comment on that. I think it's also a bit of a kind of two-sided effort as well. There's the opportunity to provide educational opportunities around what planning is how folks can actually participate in the process. But there's also the opportunity to, for the city to actually change, revise how it communicates that information to the larger community, so that the information around planning, like for those of us who are in the profession, a lot of times we're dealing with terms and ideas around planning that are very academic, for lack of a better word, and are not necessarily the most accessible ways to communicate with everyone else who doesn't do this in their regular day-to-day. And so that's why I said it goes on both sides. There's the education aspect that the community can benefit from, but there's also a shift from the city side in terms of how they are sharing planning information, even how they're scheduling meetings and making certain meetings available to people to participate in the planning process in a way that's more accessible than maybe going on right now.
Yeah, and I think, as part of this process, especially as we move forward to, we're trying to be clear throughout, and we continue, have things flagged for us that we need to explain further, and that's great. We're glad we're having those discussions, but especially as we get into zoning, the land use map and zoning, having some clear discussions about what that means will be really important. So I think that's a good point. Are there additional questions, LaToya? I close up my, oh wait, this one. Oh, there's a question or a comment about, excuse me. Noting that there are, several predominantly Black neighborhoods, that may or may not have been sort of destroyed during this urban renewal process. That noting, well, let's see. I think the point of this comment, if Mr. Kenneth, if I'm misinterpreting, please let me know. But I think the point is to say that there are some Black neighborhoods throughout the city of Charlottesville, for example, and looking at, how they may or may not be impacted by land use decisions would be important. I think that's certainly something we're keeping in mind. Let's see here. If there's anyone who wants to ask, come unmuted and make a question or a comment, please feel free to select the raise your hand button, or if there are any further questions, please feel free to submit them. While you're all thinking about that, I'll just do a quick reminder. Dina mentioned we'd love for you to attend the Affordable Housing Plan webinar. The second webinar happening for that is on Tuesday night at 6:30. There was one on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, the 11th, so that recording's up on the website now too. So if you'd like to take a look at that, feel free. And then to reiterate, on the 19th and 24th, we'll also have these office hour virtual drop-in sessions where the team will be available. It's very casual. You can stop in and ask a question. There's no, or just give your comments. There's no presentation during those. So we'd encourage you to consider dropping into those to talk with us more. Well, if there's no further questions or comments, I'll just thank you all for coming today and asking some really good questions and giving us a lot to think about. We look forward to having you continue to be involved as we move forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, Jenny, that I thought the questions and comments that were brought up today were extremely useful, and it's exactly the kind of feedback that we need at this stage in the process. And so I wanted to thank everybody for attending and taking the time to ask these questions and make us aware of some of the things that you did.